So hi, my name is Paolo Rista, and I'm a fin designer for some of the races on the circuit in kite racing. And well, it all started, I was involved in windsurfing and racing back in the day, and had an opportunity to get involved in naval architecture, and spent a number of years working in France on sort of high-tech racing boats. And then moved back to Maui and took the chance to get back into some of the wind sports and smaller craft, and started the fin company there. And I've always been very close to the kite racing scene. I like the sport, and I like the innovation and the fact that there's been a lot of room to progress and evolve over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. And so I guess being a rider as well, it's given me the opportunity to mix the technology and on the water feeling, and that seems to have put us out front in fin design, at least at this point in time. Some riders really know what they want, and I will work closely with them to help them or give them what they're looking for. I also learn a lot from listening to them, and in fact, I'd go as far as saying as a designer, I have to have riders who give me feedback and share their feelings with me, and then we interpret them, and then we will try a few different, we'll experiment and then try to evolve like that. Other people will come to me because the board brand will have recommended my fins with the boards. Others will have seen just some of the videos, or been recommended by other riders to come and work with me. So you've got a bit of everything that sort of sends people down towards me. I would say the good news is that we're right at that point now where even a brand new fin today, in 6 months from now, will still be very competitive, and even next season. So the sport has been through an amazing evolution, but now that we've limited the board dimensions, the fins also are stabilizing very close to one another. So again, it's becoming more a question of, is the fin the right size for the weight of a rider, or is the fin the right fin for a particular board, as opposed to any fin being necessarily out of date or the wrong one. And so the key is becoming to be more intimate and close to each rider, as opposed to developing the technology of the fin. And I think that's good news. That's a healthy progression for the sport. And so as the playing field levels technology wise, even between the different fin brands and board brands and kite brands, we're seeing the riders start to show themselves and their abilities and become proud of that and enjoy that, as opposed to before it was really, can I get that board, or can I get that latest fin, because without it I don't have any game. There are definitely certain things that we're starting to understand are constants. For example, the cant of a fin seems very linked to the rocker line of a board. If a board wants to, if a board's sticking too much, you need to put a little more cant to it. If the board's flying, a little less cant. So we already tuned somewhat that area of the fin. The actual outline template is, for us, we make major changes, but they're all within, 1/8 of an inch or a millimeter. So really, in a nutshell, it's the same fin. But flex is very important. Light winds, if you don't have enough flex in the fin, it just doesn't foil up and work. But when you're in windier conditions and you're pushing more on the fin, if the fin is too flexy, it spills the power and you don't get the drive. So flex, outline, cant, rake, materials are all very important. But there's a basic list of maybe 10 parameters now that we just know are the 10 we want to be working with to create a recipe for a good fin. Well, I think that what we've seen happen is, you have a couple of fin brands out there like Select or Tectonics Maui or Rista Fins, being myself, and each of them has had a particular fin in the product range that has worked specifically towards kiting. And so we've allowed ourselves to then use those, which in some ways evolved from windsurfing. But what we're trying to do now is get into the kiting fin itself, and there is definitely a difference. And I would say that you could argue almost that 5% of windsurfing fins would work in kiting, and all the others just are wrong, too vertical, too stiff, too thick, whatever the problem might be. So there definitely is a kite race fin different to a windsurf fin, but there is an overlap between, you know, a percentage of the windsurf fins that are out there. Back in the early 1990s, I was teammates with Robbie Nash, sponsored by Mistral and Gastra, and so already back then, you know, working with Curtis or you know, a few of the other fin companies, we were having the same exploration taking place, and it's not that different now. And in fact, kite racing now is almost like windsurfing was back in the early 1990s. It's that same phase in the sport where it's still evolving. Well, I think the key is to look at windsurfing or kiting as a whole. I think that kiting has been this sort of refreshing. I mean, you could look at kiting as an extension of a windsurfer, and it's just a newer version of a similar thing that has opened up more variety in performance or wind or weather conditions. Windsurfing was always fairly specific to ideal conditions, whereas kiting is broader. So I think that that's one thing healthy for the sport of kiting, and I think kite racing is a natural progression as you get an older, maturer kiter who either physically or mentally wants to find something new to move into. Racing is a wonderful way of becoming part of a new community. You're very connected to the other people on the water. When you come in, there's these lengthy discussions on what happened out there, and I think that is almost the key, is that there's a link between the other people on the water that just gives you this good feeling when you come in and allows it to keep evolving. So kite racing, it's young now. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be understood by the people that run the races, and by the people that start doing the sport, so that they have a good experience. And I think that if that's done properly, there's really a healthy future for the sport. The equipment, because of it plateauing in its evolution, within 6 months to a year, you're going to have some great deals on used, good kite racing equipment, whereas before you would buy a second-hand board and you just couldn't compete because it had changed too much of that period of time. So this is going to allow for a lot of entry-level sailors to not spend enormous amounts of money to get the latest equipment, be competitive, and I guess experiment with the sport, find out whether they like it, and that will make a big difference, I think, from an entry level. So you will have more boards you can borrow, more boards you can buy, but it's going to be much easier to get on the water and try it. And I think that we're also seeing the equipment getting easier to use. You know, in fins, in fact, over the last 2 months, I would almost think if I look back, we focused more on making a fin easy to ride in extreme conditions, so that, for example, when I work with you know, with Adam, he's always saying, I want to be out of the boat. I want to be thinking about my race and not trying to keep this board in the water and get the juice out of it. It must just work. I think most of the major brands now are bringing out good equipment, so you can pretty easily get on the production board from the brand you feel most comfortable with, or by looking at who's doing well on the water, decide on your choice of equipment, and the choice becomes fairly easy from there. You know, it's a kite brand will have a specific kite towards racing, or the racers will be using a particular kite out of that product range. The same applies to boards. You know, the race board from a particular brand, usually they produce one board, so you have a choice of one board. And then the fins, this is where I have fun, is that I suddenly get to work far more distributed across the actual evolution of the sport right now, and the fins are key. You know, I've had customers getting the normal production fins with their boards. They start out with that, it's fine, it's great, and once they feel like, you know what, I need a little bit more of a competitive edge, then they upgrade in the fins, and that's where you know, my side of the sport comes in. So.